You're listening to the Journey Podcast. What is the Clearmind way and how can it support your holistic well-being? Stay tuned to find out more in this episode. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer, and with decades of experience with sadness, pain, anxiety, and stress, I finally figured out how to leave all that behind. And this podcast shows you how to break free permanently so you can reclaim your sanity and find the self-esteem and energy to go after the life you desire. With real talk about mental health, holistic healing, and the tough journey of coming out the other end. This is the Journey Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. Today is part of Mental Health Awareness Week in the UK, and this is a special bonus episode. Kinesiology is a holistic healing modality that aims to promote overall health and well-being by addressing imbalances in the body's energy systems. It draws on a range of techniques and principles from various healing traditions, including Chinese medicine, chiropractic, and psychology. In kinesiology, muscle testing is often used as a tool to identify areas of imbalance and determine which techniques and approaches will be most effective in promoting healing. Today's guest often feels like his Clearmind process is like the first stage of a space-bound rocket. It propels us out of the gravity of our unconscious limitations, then drops away, no longer needed as we sail inevitably towards awakening. Like so many, Ian Haycroft searched for ways to be internally free. Some of those efforts failed miserably, and some of them opened doors he had not even imagined. Born in Australia, Ian started meditating when he was a young man. Based on some of his experiences with meditation, he went to India to find his guru in 1977. His one-year trip away ended up being a journey of 21 years. From India, Ian traveled through Europe and the United States where he met his wife Kim, and together they raised their 6 children. In the US, Ian worked mostly in international relief work, and in 1996 his family moved to China, where he was general manager of a vegetable export company for 3 years. In 1999 they settled in Australia, and Ian wondered what he was really going to do when he grew up. Worn out and tired of the corporate life, he found kinesiology and a way to serve people that he had never imagined. Now their children have grown up, Ian is still here, still standing, as Paul Simon says, and he decided that it is now his time to serve beyond the confines of a clinic in Australia and reach out to those in the world who might benefit from what he has learned. Ian believes we are each destined to become awake to who we really are and to the incredible connection we have to each other and the present consciousness that holds us all. His hope is that he can be a supportive agent in that journey of awakening for as many people as he can. Here is my interview with Ian Haycroft. Hi, Ian. It's so great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you because the Clearmind way is such an amazing topic for holistic healing. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm very excited to find out more. So for starters, do you want to share a little bit about yourself and how you got into this work?
Yeah, sure. It's a long life, so I'll give you the short version of a long life. But as you can probably tell from the accent, I'm Australian and I'm speaking to you from Australia. And like a lot of Australians, after I went to university, I thought I'd take a year off and go find my guru in India, having studied yoga and meditation. And I thought I'll go to India and find my guru and be enlightened within months and everything will be okay. And of course, as you can imagine, it didn't quite happen that way. I did get to India. I did live on some ashrams. I lived in a Buddhist monastery for a little while. Got really sick. And so I had to leave because I was too sick to stay. And so I had the choice of go back to Australia. And I thought, I can't go back. That's admitting defeat. So I went to England. I was 2 weeks in hospital in England. And then I was like, okay, well, what do I do now? And I was always interested in communities. So I lived in a community in Wales for a while, which was a alternative kind of community. And then I thought I'd like to go to the US and look at different kind of spiritual communities. So I flew to the US and hitchhiked across America. And my plan was to hitchhike and then go home. But of course, I met the person who's now my wife. My 1 year trip out of Australia turned into 20 years, 22 years actually, plus 6 children and a wife. So we stayed in the States for 20 years. My wife is American, and we had our kids there. And most of that time I worked in the not-for-profit international relief world, moved around to different places, but essentially that kind of work. And then as we started having more children, paying for them became more and more difficult in the non-profit world. So I got work with an international business, and through all kinds of interesting stories, we ended up in China, living and working in China in a vegetable export company.
Wow.
And we stayed there I stayed there 3 years. Kim and the kids stayed only for a year and a bit because it was really a challenge living in China with 6 blonde-haired, blue-eyed kids in a land of one child, dark-haired, dark-eyed children. We just stuck out like a sore thumb, and we were in a relatively rural area. So it was after the first kind of, this is interesting, it became quite difficult for the family, right? So Kim and the kids moved to New Zealand so that they could have a quiet place to be. And I flew in there and back working. And then after about 3 years, that contract came to an end and it was time to move on. And we made the decision to come back to Australia, which is my home. And I mean, I love America, but we just felt we could give the kids a quality of life in Australia that was more easier to do in the States. And we moved back to Australia. And I had one of those moments when, at 47 with a bunch of kids thinking, I cannot do this corporate thing anymore. It's driving me crazy. What am I going to do when I grow up? I've got to do something that I can love. And so I lived on a dirt road then, like I do now, actually. And I was walking along having a very strong conversation with what I called in those days God. And I probably still do, right? And I basically said, you better show up because I need some help. And literally a couple of days later, somebody handed me this pamphlet about this teaching, this kind of kinesiology thing. And I just felt, ooh, okay. So I went to that evening presentation and everything in my body and mind just lit up, and I thought, wow, I could do this, and I could help people. So I trained to do that. And then I started my own clinic, which I call the Clearmind Clinic, the Clearmind Way, which uses the muscle testing technique of kinesiology, which is and I'm happy to explain that if you want, but basically it's a muscle testing technique that actually these days, lots of chiropractors and osteopaths and naturopaths use a muscle test to ask the mind-body system what's going on. So I use that technique to help understand what's going on an emotional and energetic level with people. So I opened that clinic up and worked in that clinic for 4 years. And then our family grew and the kids left home and we only had one child left at home. And she wanted to go to a school in Brisbane, which was a couple of hours from where we lived. And we didn't want to just kind of billet her out. We wanted to be with her. So we decided to move to Brisbane, and I also got an offer to start a business with somebody in a crowdfunding financial services business. And so I did that and the Clearmind work together. And I've done that for about 10 years. And then my wife kept asking me, are you ever going to retire? But she was right, because I dragged her around cities all of our lives, LA, New York, Washington, Shanghai, Brisbane. And she was born in a tiny rural community in Massachusetts in the States. And then she was right. So we moved to the country in Australia, up the East Coast in from Byron Bay. And I've been doing this work online now for a few years, plus some other things as well. But that's the quick version of too long a story.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, and what a journey it has been for you. But it sounds like you have found a calling you are truly passionate about and you really enjoy. So let's talk a little bit about what you do And if you want to explain to our listeners what the Clearmind way is, and maybe also a little bit about the muscle testing that you mentioned so they can get an idea of what you do, it sounds fascinating.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. So the Clearmind way is just a label that I gave to a system. I think probably the best way to explain it is a lot of people say I'm a kinesiologist, right? I'm always careful because there's many kinds of kinesiology, right? So what I usually say to people is I use the muscle testing technique of kinesiology and then apply that to a system that I've helped develop, or that I did develop. I got a certain amount of training and then developed the system. But the essence of the process is that, and I tell this to every person I see, right, every client I see. So essentially everything that we've ever experienced in our life, physically, chemically, emotionally, energetically, it's all recorded. It's recorded within us in the cells, which are ever changing, and in the energy that gives life to the cells. Right? So that's a lot of information. And there's this wonderful system that's developed in human beings called the unconscious, right? So that if you think about an iceberg, the tip of the iceberg of what we experience is what we call conscious experience, what we think it is, right? And the rest of that iceberg is unconscious stuff we've stored, right? And often people go, oh, I don't want to deal with the unconscious, there's a certain fear, right? But actually it's such a wonderful system, right? Because you would not want to be aware 24/7 of everything that ever happened to you physically, chemically, emotionally, energetically. It's too much information. So very wisely, it's stored unconsciously, right? And so the Clearmind system is just a system, it's kind of a logical system that I use to help people using a muscle test to discover stories and issues in the unconscious that are getting in the way of their conscious experience, right? Because very often what we think is going on may not be the only thing that's going on, right? So we have so much experience in our life. And I often say to people, most of that stuff is filed perfectly well. If you use a computer analogy, it's filed just fine, right? But some stuff could have been filed better, or it has an attachment, usually an emotional attachment, gets in the way of our experience, right? And shows itself in our day-to-day life in ways that are not healthy, So so people, and there's so many examples of, claustrophobia, fear of intimacy, so many fears that come up in people's lives, or certain things that just make us angry, we don't know why, or where we constantly judging ourselves negatively, right? So much of this impetus comes from the unconscious. So why I love the muscle test is because it uses the mind-body system to ask the system what's going on here, right? And with the muscle test, if it's hard to do online because it's hard to show online, right? Because usually when people experience it, they have their arm out, or a chiropractor will move a leg or something like that. And what they're doing is asking the muscle whether there's a strong response or a weak response, right? So a strong response from the muscle to a statement that's made is the body saying, essentially, I'm okay with this, right? A weak response is the mind-body system saying, there's something here that's not in balance. So in essence, we get a yes and a not yes response. And so it's quite binary. When people first come to see me, I say, look, we're going to look at the physical, the chemical, the emotional, and the energetic. And I very clearly say to people, the physical and the chemical, that's not my area, right? If I muscle test and something comes up that is a physical issue or a chemical issue, primarily, I'll say you need to see your naturopath or go to a doctor or go to a chiropractor or whatever. So I do focus on the emotional and the energetic. My bias is that I think most issues originate energetically. When they're not resolved energetically, they'll tend to show emotionally. They're not resolved emotionally, it'll start to show in the body system, right? So I think always better to, if we can, get it at the energetic and emotional level, because that often is the crux of the issue. So essentially what I do, and I have a series of charts on the wall or on my computer, which I use a muscle test to go, okay, physical, chemical, emotional, and energetic. Let's say we go, okay, and it goes weak and emotional, meaning The issue we need to look at is through the emotional doorway, right? And then we go more narrow, what area of life, right? Then I've got charts with all kinds of areas of life, and I literally test until I get to a word. And then within that area of life, what is the key emotion, right? And we can test for that. And then we can test even what was the age, show us the age where this issue had its primary impact, right? So what we're doing is step by step by step, getting more and more specific, right? And this really helps the unconscious, because our unconscious is our best friend. It wants to protect us. It's trying to protect us. Yeah. That's its job, right? And if I was to say in the beginning, oh, I'm psychic, simsalabim, I know what it is, that, right? The unconscious, which is built to protect us, will go, who are you? Why should I do anything, right? But if we can, with the permission, of course, of the person we're working with, as we get more and more specific, I often feel like the unconscious goes, oh, finally someone found it. I can let it go now, right? Because people often say, well, how does healing work, right? Well, we're designed to heal. So when we discover an imbalance, our system is designed to either reintegrate it properly or let it go, right? So I always say to people, the healer in the room is you, not me. You're the healer, not me. So that's essentially the system. And then there's other things we can talk about, subpersonalities. We can talk about limiting beliefs. We can talk about energy influences. There's many things we can get to. But in essence, it's really a simple process of elimination.
Yeah.
That's the essence. Yeah.
That sounds fascinating. And you know what I love about this is the fact that we are actually very intuitive. So it seems like we have all the answers we need already within ourselves. Just sometimes we can't get to them. And you can help us uncover these answers so that we can support our well being and we can live better and healthier lives. It's absolutely fascinating that we don't need machines or tools. All of this is already inside of us. I love that.
Yeah. No, me too. I mean, I love it, right? I often say to people, look, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. You don't need me to be that. I'm just joining the dots of issues that exist in the unconscious. And then you are the one who will allow that to be released. Yeah. Now, of course, sometimes, there's work that people need to do sometimes, right? But I often say to people that the key work is already happening. Your unconscious is doing its job. You just need to relearn certain pattern or overcome certain patterns, right? Because many of us have certain fears that we've held in the unconscious, and we've acted in certain ways to change our behavior to deal with that fear. Often, sometimes well, often not so well. We've adapted not so well. And we need to sometimes relearn a way of dealing with that isn't connected to the fear, right? But my experience is the unconscious releases that, and then without that drag or connection, people are more able to change their behavior. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I am wondering, like you said, people do store everything in their unconscious. And
yeah.
for a lot of people, there's been trauma, there have been difficult experiences, and those might come up as you're working with the unconscious mind. So, how do you approach when those negative situations come up for people who have experienced traumas?
But I think it really depends on exactly what's going on, right? But I mean, the first thing is, I think the key to doing this work or any work with humans, I think, is to have the heart of the servant, to care and love those people, right? Because lots of people, all of us have things that are challenging for us to handle. But I always reaffirm to people, you're not broken, right? Things have happened, but you are not broken, right? Because I think the essence of each human is that we are awareness, we are consciousness. Yeah. So, I mean, my experience is, like when I had a clinic, I would say 80% of my clients would be women.
Mm-hmm.
Of those 80%, I reckon those who would come to see me, 80% had experienced some kind of sexual abuse. Right? It's a massive issue. Yeah. So that's painful. difficult, right? Sometimes people would say to me when we do the muscle, then I'd say, what happened at age 7, in relation to this. They would, obviously cry, and there's a lot of emotion there. And sometimes I would say, you're the first person I've ever told this to, right? So I think the only thing to do is to receive that and support people, right? And I often say, I'm not the only one who can support them. So it's not about, I'm the only one. That they may need to go to counseling of some kind or, other approaches to support them, right? But my experience is that if we have the heart to serve and really care for the person, then in that safe environment, things can emerge that are healing. That stuff needs to be healed, right? And often people feel, I don't want to go in the unconscious, it's too scary. And I say, there's nothing that you can't face, right? Now, of course, some people have terrible trauma, right? So it's not like, I don't know, I never say it'll be easy, right? But it's much better to allow that to come out. And then if there's need for other support, I'm always happy to go, I know this practitioner that, to get a lot of support, right? So, but, healing happens.
Yeah. Yeah. And you are right. If we don't heal the traumas that are in our bodies, that are in the subconscious and the unconscious, it will go to the physical plane at some point, and we will experience illnesses, we will experience disease and just not feeling well. So it is very important that we get to some of those things and actually start the healing process on them. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I try to work with people to show them that they can do this themselves. They don't actually need me, right? I think the muscle test is an amazing technique to help, right? But there's a certain point, I think there's kind of a break-even point, I guess the better way to say it, that where working with people, we can discover some of the key elements, and then they become actually, I help them, I work with them to say, you can actually see this arise. They can learn how to, they don't even have to muscle test, right? They can intuit and understand that which they need to look at. And people are much better at it than they think often.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I'm curious about the kind of changes you see. So, when you work with people on these issues and you use muscle testing, and they may come to you with all sorts of different complaints that they're dealing with, things they struggle with, mental, emotional, physical. And what kind of changes do you see once you start working with them? What changes in their lives? What changes emotionally, mentally for them?
Wow, so many stories, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like this magic formula. It always works like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
It really is very much to do with the individual, right? So, I think I'll use a couple of strange examples, right? I remember one woman coming to me who had a constantly sore ankle and foot, right? And she'd been to every person, doctors, all kinds of different people, and could not. Just every morning she'd wake up with such pain in her feet, right? And so I did my thing, and we located, what I would call a real emotional block in relation to moving forward in a particular relationship she was in, right? And so I did the work, and it was, I think she came to be really clear. Of course, right? She saw it, right? Next day she's fine, no pain, right? So, but I always say to people that, it's not like I'm not a magician. So, okay, then everything will fix straight away, right? Because that's not the nature of being human, and doesn't take into account the karmic propensity. Because some people, there's a certain karmic process, I think. So,
Mm-hmm.
but so there are things that physically people can have certain pains or issues that can really be released with the emotional and energetic change. And then, things like more deeper traumas like sexual abuse, for example. Again, it's so individual, right? But I think so often what I saw was there's a point at which people go, I can face this. I can be aware and survive. And I think so often if we find a way to detach the stories from the experience, right, there's a doorway opens for people to experience who they really are, right? And I often, my clients will say, you're a bit of a broken record. I say the same thing, right? Meaning, essentially, who are you? You are divine awareness, infinite divine awareness. That's who you are. So all these issues, they are not who you really are. They do not define you, right? And as people begin to see they actually can face these things, then it can be life-changing in the sense of changing their perspective, because perspective is everything. Change the perspective, that which seems tragic and unbearable can become the most door-opening lesson, right? And again, not to say that these things, that, oh, it's a magic snap my fingers and everything's fixed. I never pretend that, because some people suffer really terrible things. But, I mean, I keep doing it because I see people who are able to really find a part of themselves that is so whole and not broken. And they can actually then face the broken bits and go, that bit's broken, but that's not who I am. That's a broken bit. Let's work on it and change it, right? And people do change in their, in their own particular ways. I mean, another kind of extreme example is I remember a woman coming to see me who had terrible liver cancer and been to everybody, right, doctor, and she heard, oh, I heard you can do miracles, right? And I get, well, let's start with the obvious. I'm not here for miracles. I believe miracles can happen, right? But, let's work this together, right? And it was one of the most beautiful experiences of my life, because we worked together for a year, and it was all about her becoming able just to face dying, right? Because she was dying. She had massive cancers all over, right? And I said, well, so we worked together, and she was able to change her perspective to realize, death is part of what goes on. And she really worked with it and became more and more joyful with the prospect of, I'm dying, but look at what we've discovered about life and the possibilities. So, there's no one way that people get better, or one process for becoming aware, right? So many possibilities.
Yeah, it sounds like a very profound approach to healing and to actually establishing like a holistic well-being. So what a wonderful work that you're doing. And do you want to go over some of your own programs and services, maybe, so that listeners, if they feel inclined and they've listened to this episode and they might want to work with you, so that they can know how they can connect with you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, these days I live up a dirt road in the country, and I actually do all this work online. And, I used to have a clinic in Noosa. Now I have people in, Ireland, Sweden, Germany, America, all over the world, actually. So people can just go to my website, right, which is theclearmindway.com, and it's all there. And they can book a session with me, and they can read all about it. And so most of the work I do is one-on-one. I am developing some courses, etc., but nothing to publicize at this point. I do a podcast with a good friend of mine who's a really mystical guy in Japan, a Kiwi and New Zealander, but he lives in Japan, called This Day. So it's this-day.org, and that's a podcast. And so, but at the moment, really, I do one-on-one activities with people, and happy to work with people from anywhere in the world. Sometimes you have to get the time zone, but mostly it works. I'm pretty flexible these days, and I do it by donation. So, it's really up to people, because I'm in that lucky position. I'm kind of old enough to be retired, and I do it because I love it. So, that's up to people. Yeah.
Wow, that's a really wonderful concept. And thank you so much for offering this work to people and making it accessible to them as well. And as Ian mentioned, he does have his podcast called This Day, and you can listen into it from your favorite podcast provider and the website. And we will be linking to all of Ian's offerings in the show notes as well. So be sure to check there for the links to the podcast and to his website also. And Ian, this has been an incredible episode, and I really hope our listeners have enjoyed this journey into the Clearmind way that we've been on for the last half hour. And it has been fantastic chatting with you, and thank you so much for coming on today and talking to us.
Oh, thank you. No, it's a really great pleasure. Really a pleasure. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I hope we get to do this again sometime. Thank you so much.
I hope so too.
Yeah. Take care, Ian.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Journey podcast, please subscribe, share on social media, and leave us a 5-star review. You can find more of The Journey on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and the Journey blog. Sending you love and courage, and see you next week.